to express my special gratitude to Professor Damayan Boy, who will deliver the opening remarks on behalf of the Department of Protection at University. And a special thank you to our guest speaker, Mr. Jack Diamond. And our moderator also, Professor Dr. Economy and Ministry for their time and also for their support. And to all participants both on site and online today, thank you for joining us. And my name is Fanny and I will be your Master of Ceremony for this seminar today. Now, first I would like to invite from the Damayan Boy to deliver the opening remarks. Professor, please. Okay, so I'm going to.
Masuk.
Okay, so good morning to all of you, to all the online and also offline participants. It's my pleasure to invite all of you to the Department of Plant Protection. And we have a very special guest today, Jack Diamond, who, how many years have you been on and off coming to Indonesia? 2 years?
Yeah, about 18 months.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming and presenting your research in Indonesia. So this is a collaboration between the department and also the Entomological Society, Chapter Bogor branch. So it's really fun to be here with the students and also Pak Pur here, my longtime partner in crime. We do research together. And yeah, the Department of Plant Protection, I think, Jake, you know that here in the department, when we speak about insect, we usually look from the eyes of the herbivore and economic loss. So it will be interesting to hear your talk today, and also all of you who's joining us offline and online. I hope that you will learn a lot from Jake's research, and it will open our understanding better about oil palm. We know oil palm is a very important crop, much hated and much loved, depending on where you are. I'm standing in the middle, where I think it is important to have oil palm, but also I think we need to have a limit of how oil palm should have. So I'm going to be a little bit political here. So science has a very important role in developing how to have a sustainable oil palm for the landscape and also for the ecology. So the Department of Plant Protection, we are at the Faculty of Agriculture, so oil palm becomes a very important commodity for us, and we are learning a lot about oil palm in terms of the insect diversity, in terms of the pollinator and pests. So this opportunity will be, I believe, will be an eye-opener for all of us, especially because we're talking about the freshwater conservation. So as we all know, there are rivers or badan air that usually are available in oil palm plantation. And today we're going to hear about freshwater conservation and the oil palm landscape. So I'm really looking forward, and this will be very important for the students here, because we usually hear this kind of talk because we're so test oriented. So it will be a very good opportunity for all of you to learn from Jake. So thank you again, Jake, for coming, and yeah, let's enjoy today. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Damayan Boy. This seminar is organized through collaboration between the Department of Plant Protection at the University and also the Entomological Society of Indonesia, Bogor chapter. And today's seminar is called Advancing Freshwater Conservation in Oil Palm Landscape. Novel approach to biodiversity monitoring and restoration. And before we begin, a few reminders for all participants, for Zoom participants also, please give your mic on mute and please type your question from the Q&A in the last session. And the presentation will be 45 minutes and followed by the 30-minute for question and answer session. And the Q&A session will be guided by the moderator. And to guide today's session, we are honored to have our moderator, Professor Dr. Insinyur Purnama Hidayat. Okay, Professor, thank you for joining us today. And our speaker today is the Jack Diamond, PhD candidate from the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. And before we begin, besides that, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, may this seminar run smoothly and bring benefit to all of us today. Thank you. And now I would like to hand over to Professor Purnama Hidayat, moderator. And Professor, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Guest speaker, Jake Raymond, my special colleague, Professor Tumayan Wali, dear students and all participants offline and online. Thank you very much for joining seminar today. My name is Purnama Hidayat. I think everyone. I think many of you know me already, so I don't have to introduce myself. Okay, today we address hot topic, I think, advancing freshwater conservation in oil palm landscape, medical approaches to biodiversity monitoring and restoration. As you know, balancing between agricultural production and biodiversity conservation, I think it's very challenging, especially in tropical area like in Indonesia, especially in Rio or in Sumatra, with that area, a lot of palm plantation there. So I think this is a very good topic. We honor today we have Jake Damon. He is a student, PhD student from University of Nottingham, United Kingdom, and he will share his insight and research regarding the topic of monitoring freshwater biodiversity using certain technology. Definitely, this must be something new for us. Without further ado, let's begin this seminar. Please join me in welcoming Jake Damon. Jake, time is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I've been honoured and thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you everyone for coming and for joining online as well. So yes, I'm a third year PhD student, my third year at Nottingham, and I look at things from an ecological perspective, and I'm currently on my final trip to Indonesia as part of my PhD. So I'm just finishing off my invertebrate IDs now, and so what I'm going to present to you today is kind of some background about what I do and some preliminary results from research and what we've done so far. So this project is a collaboration with IPB University Cambridge, and CMS, and my university, Nottingham, obviously joined this collaboration as well. Okay, so today's presentation, I'm going to start off with some background. I'm going to kind of look at why freshwater biodiversity is important in the region, and kind of what role oil palms playing in that, but also, as we've touched on just before we started the presentation, is the huge potential that there is in oil palm and the advantages of a park and other agricultural types. And then what types of restoration that we can do. So yeah, freshwater conservation summary. So biodiversity loss globally is greatest in freshwaters. It's because multiple stresses act synergistically on these ecosystems, and they have highly dense variety of species. The tropical freshwaters in particular experience particularly high rates of biodiversity loss. And this is because they have extremely high rates of concentrations of endemic species, and they're also subject to rapid rates of habitat loss degradation. And in the biogeographic region of England, you can see that the expansion of oil palm plantations is a significant factor influencing freshwater biodiversity. Yet freshwater taxonomy, ecology and conservation is not well studied in the region. So within 90% of palm oil is produced on the low peninsula and the Indonesian islands of Borneo and Sumatra, where monoculture plantations have replaced these tropical rainforests. So consequently, we have a situation whereby oil palm plantations are becoming novel habitats with the landscape scale, and we have an impact on freshwater ecosystems. But few studies have quantified this so far. And so on the graphic on the right here, we kind of summarise some of these effects that act synergistically in these freshwater ecosystems, such as land use change, pollution, habitat loss, water interaction, climate change. So first of all, I want to kind of set the background with the importance of the coupling of the forest, the riparian forest and the stream, and its bidirectional connection between these two ecosystems. So streams which pass through forests have an intimate important codependency with the riparian trees, seasonal trees on the right side of the river, which occupy their floodplain. And these freshwater riparian ecosystems, so freshwater terrestrial ecosystems, tightly coupled, and they exchange organisms, matter, and energy. This is kind of depicted on this graphic on the right here. So, for example, riparian forests supply inputs of coarse organic material, such as leaf litter and fallen terrestrial invertebrates that fall from plants, providing frozen food resources to freshwater species, and it's an important driver in stream ecosystem structure and function. And these influxes of nutrients and energy are then recycled back to the terrestrial riparian ecosystem as insects emerge from the river as adults, and then provide a food source for the terrestrial predators such as birds. And other ecological services provided by the streams to the riparian forests include freshwater provision, creation and regulation of microclimates, microhabitats, and they also act as a corridor for the dispersal of terrestrial species through forests. And vice versa, services of the riparian forest by the river include erosion control, as the roots of the trees kind of bind together the soil along the banks. They also filter out pollutants, which can originate from wider areas in the catchment, and provide shading and therefore water temperature reduction within the stream. They also provide importantly inputs, so the roots can provide important habitats in the stream or create structural complexity, and they provide inputs to large woody debris, so fallen trees and branches which provide important habitats in the river, which is a concept that we'll come on to later in the presentation. So just to kind of summarize some of the impacts that we see on plantations on river ecosystems. Then typically we see that oil palm plantation streams have simplified homogenized channels and reduced habitat diversity. And this can be worsened when the channel is intentionally channelized, so dredged out and straightened. And this kind of results in the image that you can see on the bottom here, which is a typical kind of homogeneous stream that we might see in an oil palm plantation. There's very little habitat availability and coarse materials within the stream. And you can see it's been dredged out on the banks. I've been material concentrations. And if you contrast this to the top, so these are both much set up in Malaysia actually. And at the top we have another sandbed stream of a similar size, but you can see as leaf litter and more heterogeneity in terms of coarse materials, substrates within the stream. And you see it's a lot more shaded as well. And so yes, so the drivers of this more simplified structure, as I said, reducing inputs of the wood debris, erosion of the banks and inputs of fine sediments, as well as we have runoff from plantations into the stream, resulting in increased silt and sand and reduced availability of coarse substrates and bedding. And the result of this is that there's reduced habitat availability for vertebrates and also fish that are focused on vertebrates in this talk. And increased water temperatures and light intensity on the stream as a result of reduced shading. And again, increased pollution, pesticides and fertilizers when used to apply into the plantations. However, then that was the argument against oil palm. This is the argument for oil palm. So 40% vegetable oil, palm oil accounts for around 40% of global vegetable oil. Yeah, only takes up around just under 5.5% of the total global oil crop area. So what does this mean? It means that oil palm is a highly productive, highly efficient crop. So for example, it's almost 6 times as productive as soy. As an alternative vegetable oil crop. Therefore, if there was not oil palm plantations, then much more land would need to be converted to agriculture in order to meet global demand. Furthermore, these plantations bring economic growth to deprived regions and livelihood improvements in smallholder families in local locations. These plantations also offer quite large potential for ecosystem restoration. So they have a replanting time of around 25 years, which means they form quite a long-term semi-stable habitat. If you compare this to, for example, sunflower oil, the sunflowers are harvested on an annual basis, and therefore that habitat is completely destroyed each year. Consequently, these plantations are capable of supporting high levels of biodiversity compared to other oil crops, if they're managed in a sustainable way. Ecological sustainable practices may be implemented within the productive area. So, for example, without applying pesticides or providing alternative fertilizers, but also through land set-asides, which I'm going to come on to now. So one example that's commonly used as a land set-aside is these riparian buffers, shown on this image here. So this is a legal requirement in Malaysia and Indonesia, and this is an area of land either side of the river which is not used for cultivation. And so this is a kind of ideal example of a riparian buffer where we have native trees either side of the river, creating this habitat forest corridor through the oil palm landscape. And so these can mitigate the impacts on the river. So you can reduce bank erosion and reduce increase the water temperature, as well as filtering out pollutants. These buffers, it's been shown in studies that these buffered streams can harbour communities which are more similar to those in forests than compared to non-buffer streams. And then these taxa consist of more pollution-sensitive taxa as well. So the issue we have is that on older plantations, wildland forest has often been already cleared before the requirement for riparian buffers was introduced. So there are no native trees left on the plantations, and instead the buffer zone comprises of passively managed oil palm, which can potentially limit the benefits of the riparian buffer. So this means that the palms are left and they mature and they're not harvested and chemicals are not multiplied, but they don't have the native tree diversity in there. And so the effectiveness of the passively managed palms compared to restored riparian forests is currently unknown, and research is required to identify optimal management strategies for plantations lacking native forest buffers. And so this is where our project comes in. So this is the Rota project, which is the riparian ecosystem restoration tropical agriculture. And the aim of this project is to assess different methods for riparian buffer restoration. So this is based at the CNRS Research Institute in the Real Province of Central Sumatra. In 2018-19, a series of 3 riparian restoration treatments were established at the Research Institute and replicated across 2 rivers, which are called Rota 1 and Rota 2. And so this is outlined the launch on the right here. So we have 4 different treatments. So 3 different restoration treatments and control. So starting from the bottom, the first restoration treatment, mature palms are left in the buffer, and there's additional enrichment planted with native tree species. Treatment B is the mature palms are left, but there's no enrichment planting. Treatment C, the mature palms are removed and there is planting of only native trees. And in treatment D, there is no buffer, so there's control. And you can kind of see on this aerial image that in treatments A and B, it's darker around the river, and this is because you can see where the mature palms have been left in, whilst the rest of the plantations have passed. Whereas C and D, you can see the mature palms are absent. So each treatment is a length of 400 meters, extends 50 meters to each side of the river, and this is a Baki experimental design. So before, after control intervention. This means we have a baseline sample before restoration is done, and then we can continue sampling after restoration, and we also have that control vision, which we monitor over time as well. Data has been collected by various different researchers and PhD students, both terrestrial and freshwater taxa. Environmental data has also been collected, including water quality, runoff, and erosion data. Okay, so I'm going to go over 2 projects that I have in Rota that I'm working on as part of my PhD. And so in the first one, I'm looking at the Odonata nymphs and communities within these streams. So Odonata, dragonfly and damselfly, are iconic taxa with extremely high levels of diversity and endemism within South Extension rainforests. And these are semi-aquatic insects that play important functional roles in freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems as both predators and prey, and they can potentially provide valuable pest control services in agricultural ecosystems. They're also been identified as potential useful bioindicators of environmental health in tropical ecosystems. And aquatic larvae communities may be particularly affected by bioindicators in stream and riparian conditions. This was learned about their ecology in Southeast Asia. So the 2 main objectives of this project: to assess the differences in Odonata nymph abundance and diversity across the different riparian restoration treatments, and to determine if changes in nymph abundance and diversity are driven by variations in water quality. So just to present some preliminary findings that we have so far from this. So on the top graph here, we have the dragonfly nymph abundance from the baseline to the 3 rest of the sampling periods post-restoration, which are every 2 years. And we have the same graph but the damselfly at the bottom. So first, if we're looking at the graphs, we see 2 very different situations here. So in the top graph, this is the dragonflies, we see the responses of Rota 1 and Rota 2 to the 2 replicates are very different. But the outcome of the most recent sampling period is that although the responses are different over time, the abundances are now very similar, despite the baseline samples, the abundances being very different. Whilst in the damselfly larvae, we see a different picture, and that's across both replicates, we see the same pattern of increase in amplify abundance post-restoration. And again, these are now very similar in abundance most recent sampling period. So these graphs here, they look at different treatments. They've combined the different treatments together, and we're going to move on to the treatment differences next slide. So we see a threefold increase in dragonfly abundance birds 1, but no overall change in birds 2, and a 2.5-fold increase in birds 1, a damselfly, and 8-fold increase in birds 2. So they're now very similar for both. So this potentially suggests that birds 1 and birds 2, despite seemingly having very different abundances at the start, potentially affecting very different habitats within these streams. Now, with 6-7 years since restoration, these streams are potentially a lot more similar. And these findings of dissimilar responses of birds 1 and birds 2 for the dragonfly is similar to what we've seen for other taxa which have been surveyed at birds 1 and birds 2. So on this graph, these graphs here, we have the treatments labeled. So this is to look at the differences between treatments, both birds 1 and birds 2 for dragonflies and damselflies. These are quite complicated and messy, and I'm going to have to look into it a lot more. But there's two kind of key things to stand out for these graphs. So what we want to look at on these graphs is the amount of change from the baseline to the most recent restoration period. And we can see that in birds 1 for the dragonflies, the greatest increase was in treatment C. So this is where the mature palms were removed and there was enrichment planted with mature species only. So this is interesting. This could potentially be because the removal of the mature palms increased the amount of light reaching streams. This is driving vegetation growth along the banks of the streams, creating habitats with the dragonflies, which can be deemed as more generalist and like open spaces. Whereas for the damselfly, we look at birds 2, we can see that treatment B has the biggest increase. So this is the treatment where we kept the mature palms and there was no enrichment planting. So this could be because the shading provided by the mature palms, because damselfly larvae compared to dragonfly larvae tend to have much more specific niche requirements and prefer shaded forest ecosystems, whereas dragonflies can tend to prefer more open, disturbed ecosystems. So they're kind of two initial findings, but yeah, a lot more kind of work is done on that.
I'm sorry. Reptile 1 and Reptile 2. When is the period? Is it the same period, 2 years, but the length of Reptile 1 and Reptile 2? There's some 2 different periods, right?
So the 2 different streams. Yeah. So sorry if I didn't make that clear. Okay. So we have 2 replicates, but the same experiment on 2 different streams with vegetation. So the third kind of thing to look at here is the ratio of dragonfly to damselfly into midstream. So birds 1, we don't see a clear pattern, but in birds 2, we see a shift from so on the bottom graph here, a dragonfly dominated community to one that's slightly dominated by damselfly. And again, this is now in the baseline, we have very different kind of portions of dragonfly to damselfly between birds 1 and birds 2. But now in the final sampling period, these are very similar proportions. So again, it's going to be indicating that there are now more similar habitat structure post-restoration after quite an extended period of time. Okay, so why does this matter? So dragonflies and damselflies, the tropics, a high ratio of dragonfly and Sumpter compared to damselfly Zygoptera have been shown to indicate a more degraded habitat. So an increase in the percentage of damselflies may represent an increase in habitat quality in restored sites. So this is because damselflies are thermal conformers, which means they rely on their environment for temperature control and are susceptible to overheating as a lack of shade. And they have a stronger affinity for shaded, intact forest ecosystems. Whilst dragonflies are exothermic and they can control the internal heat temperature, and they also have better dispersal capabilities, and so tend to be more associated with altered ecosystems and environments. Again, some of our data appears to support this, but this may be an oversimplification. So just looking at dragonflies and damselflies may not provide enough detail as shown in the studies, with amazing to look at the family level. So the two dominant families that we have, so Cornigonidae for the damselflies and Livernidae for the dragonflies, these are both generalist families, and these are dominated in both our families. And these have been shown to indicate forest degradation in the tropics. So this is something we need to look into more here. So in summary, we often see different responses in row to 1 and row to 2, but they seem to be more similar now in this final sampling period. So what does this suggest? Well, it highlights the complexity of real-world restoration and replication issues that we typically have in ecological research, whereby if you look to an experiment, at one time they show one thing, but then trying to repeat that experiment often shows different results. This is due to how complex the natural environment is. And it also highlights the importance of long-term monitoring, so you can see that these relationships change over time. And it'll be interesting to see how these relationships continue to develop in the future. So the next steps of this research is to look at the more specific family and genus level differences across the treatments, try and pick those differences apart, and also look at the influence of water quality changes over time and across the different treatments. Okay, so what about in the river itself? So we talked about the terrestrial riparian ecosystems and how this affects the river. But as we've also said, many streams are now homogeneous and lack in-stream habitats and complexity, such as large woody debris. Now, in temperate regions, like in Europe and America, large woody debris restoration is a very common technique. So this is putting large wood back into the rivers, as seen in this picture, to kind of create change, drive habitat complexity, and put wood back in the river that would have been once in there when these streams were surrounded by forests. But there's currently no advice on in-stream habitat restoration on all plantations. Large woody debris. What? Large woody debris. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this type of large wood restoration may be particularly beneficial in streams that were previously forested in sandbed streams. And this is because these streams have a high potential, sandbed streams, for hydraulic change. And so by putting wood in the river, we can potentially drive changes in the habitat. And so I'll explain this more in this slide here. So these are kind of different effects that woody debris can have within the streams. So hydraulic heterogeneity. So having the wood in the streams can diversify the flow of the stream. This creates areas of high low and areas of low flow, which can act as refuge for fish and vertebrates to shelter from high flow conditions, so from fast river flow. It can also lead to changes in sediment deposition, with sediment build in some areas, other areas, so really creates more diversity in hydrology. And again, physical heterogeneity, so more habitat complexity, finding habitats and microhabitats for algae, invertebrates, fish, also to colonize. It can also, provide stable habitats, which is particularly important in sandbed streams, because sandbed is a highly mobile environment, so it's often moved around a lot by the river. And it's a very difficult environment for invertebrates to survive in, within stable substrates, which they often attach to or shelter by. And so we really provide stable habitats. They're also a source of carbon neutrals and act as a site for biogeochemical reactions to take place. There's other decomposition, and they can also increase vertical connectivity. So this means the connectivity between the bottom of the river and what we call the hyperreef zone, which is the area below the sediment. And it's used the oxygenation of the sediments.
Okay. Yes.
So there's some of the examples of the benefits of working out in the rivers. So this brings me on to my second project, where I aim to assess the potential of using palm fronds to recreate the function of woody debris in streams, and to see whether this varies across the different riparian restoration treatments they get. And does this create changes in hydrology and habitat heterogeneity? And how does this affect the vertebrate communities? So on the top right here, you can see experimental design. So we have the same satellite image before of Rota 1 with the riparian restoration treatments A to D. And then within each treatment, I've set up 4 of these woody debris experiments, plus a control at the start and the end of each treatment. And so at the bottom, we can see a picture of this woody debris design. So we bound these palm fronds together to create these structures and place them in the river to see if they can directly provide habitat for invertebrates. They've also changed the hydrology of the stream and sediment conditions. These are quite small structures, we're kind of limited by what they can carry, but it's like it's a nice little experiment to see the potential of use of these palm fronds. So when I went to resample them, I initially had a total of 20 structures, but 12 of them had either been washed out by the river or completely buried underneath the sand. So therefore, I did some additional sampling of natural woody debris that have fallen into the river. This was typically young palms that have been growing along the banks of the river and have fallen in. And this is because palms have very shallow roots, and so they're very easily blown over and kind of subject to erosion of the banks as well, because they don't hold the banks together the same way that native trees do. So the top right just shows a picture of one of my structures, and you see it's trapped a lot of debris. That's a buildup of organic material, which, as we'll move on to see, provides some habitat for invertebrates and resources. So I have 3 groups then that I'm working to compare. So this is just a subset of my data, but we have the baseline data, which was collected before the restoration, before we put the palm fronds in the stream. We then have the palm frond structures that we put in that weren't washed out or buried. And then finally, we have the natural wood, so these palms that are falling into the river and by themselves that we also sampled. And we see really big differences here. So the average number of vertebrate specimens that we had in the baseline samples was only 3. And so this is because, like I said before, these sandbed rivers really homogeneous, and the invertebrates can't really survive in sand, low oxygen conditions, highly mobile. It's not a stable environment. But then you can see this increases 11-fold to an average of 33 specimens at my restored sites. So I sampled around my palm frond structures. And finally, the biggest communities were like these fallen palms that were in the streams themselves. I haven't run a statistical test on this yet, but we can see the very big differences. What we can see as well is that, we'll move on to the next one. So also as well, so that was looking at abundance, and this is now looking at the richness of species. So again, we find that the highest richness of species is around the naturally fallen palms in the stream, and the restored sites we find the sort of middle area between the baseline data and the naturally fallen palms. So to kind of summarize these findings, these palms that have fallen into the river show the greatest abundance and diversity of invertebrates. This was followed by the restored sites. There was very little life in the sands. Therefore, palm debris provides a vital habitat for invertebrates in these typical sandbed streams that we see on palm oil plantations. And so on the baselines, we saw that these samples were dominated by dragonfly larvae. And on the wood sites, samples were dominated by flies, fly larvae, and caddisfly larvae. And the decapods, the crab and the shrimp, were only found at the weak sites. So, and again, we can kind of come back to look at this ratio of dragonflies and damselflies. So on the baseline, we had a ratio of 5:1 dragonfly to damselfly. This decreased to 5:2 at the restored sites, and then again to 5:4 at the natural sites. So we potentially see that these larger woody structures, the fallen palms, that are more decayed and more complex, potentially providing more microhabitats to suit the specific niche requirements to the dragonfly larvae, as we touched on earlier. So the next steps with this research is to split the invertebrates into their functional feeding groups. So, for example, are they predators? Are they filterers? Are they collect gatherers? We go around collecting and gathering material to see how they are kind of using these structures, usable structures, and what type of organisms within the ecosystem are benefiting those, what functions they have. And also to look at differences between treatments, so how we looked into this one. Okay, so this is just the final slide now. Just to mention some other research that I'm doing in Malaysia. So my university has a campus just outside Kuala Lumpur. So I've been doing some work there as well. So in this kind of presentation, we've discussed the benefits of riparian buffers on palm oil plantations. But ultimately, their effectiveness has been shown to be limited by effects of the catchment scale. So this is what I'm kind of looking at on my Malaysia study, is how important is the riparian land cover relative to the broader catchment land cover, which one is most importantly driving river health and freshwater ecosystems. And can buffers still effectively, are they as effective if the catchment is dominated by palm oil, or if the catchment has a variety of land use types and isn't just dominated by palm oil molecules, because this leads to better freshwater ecosystems. And so kind of an example of two extreme ends of the scale are shown in this picture here. So at the bottom, you kind of have this typical palm oil monoculture, and this is a highly degraded, dredged out, channelized straight to the stream. Again, you see there's no habitat in there. And this is kind of one extreme end of the scale of a very poor freshwater ecosystem with a high level of disturbance, and there's very few invertebrates. Again, mostly just a few dragonflies being sent. And at the other end of the scale, is you have these kind of small scale plantations within these more diverse heterogeneous landscapes with a variety of different land uses and tree types. And so this is a stream from this site, a small plantation, where it has a lot more coarse substrate, it's more shaded, more habitat diversity, and it has a much bigger sample with a lot more invertebrates in there. So yeah, that's something else we're looking into, is the catchment scale effects as well as the riparian effects. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear any questions.
Thank you, Jake. I will look at the question and answer. So we have about 64 inputs, 64 online participants, and of course we have some here. So any question from this room? So please raise your hand. Okay, that's it. Simple. Thank you. Next question. I want to ask about we know that the stream fall from the ESQ direction from the upstream. Very possible. The effect of the gas line. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. Is there any possibility that the impact of the restoration is happening maybe hundreds of meters of the ponds because of the water falls from the upstream to downstream? Yeah, that's like maybe some of the textile or the function of like plankton or something like that happen or 100 meters of the ponds. Is there any possibility like that?
Masih kosong.
Yeah, so I can just maybe if I go back, straight, build an aircon for a little bit. So if I just go back to my experimental design. So just on here, you can see what needs to kind of shift over to the right. And that's because we leave about a 150-meter gap between each treatment. So what this means is we had our sample. So for the breed experiment, I had my experiment in A, but then I left quite a big gap before I started it in B. And this was to reduce the effects being transferred downstream, like I said. So for example, if they're so because these different riparian treatments are all one after the other, then yes, you can see the effects transfer downstream. And so this is why for my woody debris restoration, I try to leave a big gap between the last restoration experiments in one treatment for the next restoration experiment in the next treatment. And also that's why I have the controls at the start and the end within each treatment, so that we could test if these kind of effects are being transferred downstream. So you have the controls as well separate to each experiments. That makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely possible that, for example, you could have more invertebrates in one treatment, and then these are transferred downstream by the water and into the next treatment, and then you see a big invertebrate. So that's definitely possible. That's why we tried to set up the experimental design in this way to reduce that, and so we could see that also.
Get a picture of street red too. Like to see.
A comparison.
Yeah, comparison.
Yeah. No, I mostly so for my experiments, I didn't mention. So this was only inverter one, and this was because a couple of reasons. It was quite a lot of work to get all of these structures and in the river, and we also thought that we should leave the rotor 2 undisturbed in case it was as a disturbing in kind of like sampling that's already going on. So we just kind of decided just to do it inverter 1 and not inverter 2. In case, yeah. So
Is it the same stream or
rotor 2 is a separate stream.
separate stream? Okay. And but then upstream or downstream?
Oh no, yeah, it's a completely different stream. Yeah. So yeah, I've only actually been to rotor 2 once, so I haven't actually seen it that well in terms of how it looks. Maybe before I leave, I can get a chance to go and actually look at it and help me kind of understand these differences.
Yeah. So you're basically saying So you're basically saying that the LWD is in Delta 1.
Yes.
Okay. Because Delta 2 is something cannot be disturbed. But there are actually natural debris that you can actually look at.
Yeah,
Did you do that?
yeah. So this was when I went to resample, and I'd lost 12 of my structures in the brain, the high flows. So this is where I sampled 5 of fallen ponds within the stream.
Oh, so this is natural.
Yeah.
You know, it's first of all, I really like your presentation. I think your research is very interesting and very important. It's also very important for their own company and also for the smallholders also how biodiversity can actually be enriched if you have this woody debris, which I'm a very terrestrial person. I don't actually look at water. So yeah, I think this is wonderful. And this means that you can advise this to the there's a practical side of your research that can be used for, I don't know, policy or something. So do you think that this will be one of the things that you would be interested also to feedback to smartly and to other compound that there's something there in the river that you should also maintain, something that you would.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, in the current kind of RSPO guidelines, there's nothing about extreme habitat restoration. So a lot of the research is focused on the riparian zone. Now, of course, over time, if you have the riparian zone that's left, these trees will fall in naturally anyway. But perhaps this is still useful kind of in the short term, or perhaps people often it's the same in the West as well. Like people will typically historically would have removed trees that are fallen in the river because they think it looks messy or it might cause flooding or dangerous, something like this. So often the trees are removed from the rivers. So yeah, it would be just to say that they're important habitats that is to leave them in and potentially even put them there if buffers aren't possible. Like we know with smallholder plantations, often it's not really feasible for them to have a riparian buffer because they were using a small plantation. And so perhaps there would be a compromise where we can create habitat diversity within the streams and without them affecting the machine.
One more question about the damsel plant, dragonflies. So which one's the indicator for better environmental quality?
So damselflies. So yeah, there's been quite a few studies on tropical ecosystems and slides of this page. I think I but there was another Sigatoka study, but yeah, it was a Sigatoka study. So they looked at tropical forests in Asia, South America, and Central Africa, I think, and they found the same pattern of certain dragonfly. So damselflies are typically more associated with intact forests where there's high shading, and the dragonflies, more sort of generalists and can benefit more in these more open habitats where the forests are lost. But again, there has been more recent research suggesting that this is too much of a broad oversimplification, and that we may need to look at the family level. There we see that the differences between generalists and specialists.
Yes, thank you, Budani. Probably there are some questions from online, so we'll take it. Okay, let's 2-3 questions now. I think 2 of them. To checks, is there the variant system installation insufficient effort in oil palm division on by multi-national companies, state-owned and smallholder farmers? So please, for the first question.
Yeah, so for the first one, thanks for the question. So there is a difference, it's kind of just what I touched on a second ago. So actually what we see is on the, well, first of all, there's a lot of variation, which I've seen, mainly from my work in Malaysia, between about riparian buffers and management. So a lot of the time, so as I said, like a riparian buffer can just be mature palms that are left. There's no native planting of native trees. Or it can be, on the flip side, it's like restored natural forest along the river. So like these can vary a lot, and they vary a lot between different plantations and their policies. So some will just leave the mature palm and they cut all the vegetation on the ground floor, and they just don't apply chemicals. They don't harvest it, that's enough. But ideally, you'd like to see the natural vegetation growth within these buffers to provide habitats for the invertebrates and for birds and frogs. So there's a lot of variation in management across plantations in general. I think that's something we hopefully try and work towards is more consistent riparian management techniques, and to show that actually native planting just have benefits, which is what we're trying to show in this research. And in terms of smallholders to these large-scale plantations, so one of the things with smallholders is it's a lot less enforced. So as I touched on a moment ago, a lot of the smallholders are very small plantations, and they use the river as the boundary for their plantation. So this means that plantation is alongside the river, and if they were to remove part of that plantation to create a buffer and not harvest, they would lose a large proportion of their plantation, and it's not feasible for them. So they don't have these buffers, and it's not really enforced. This is more enforced on the large scale plantations owned by the big companies, which can afford to give up some of their land. And then the second question.
I think the second question from Pak Nurfianto. Are there any possible differences between insect biodiversity in canal riparian, stream riparian, and a large river riparian that's surrounded by oil palm plantation area? So please. So which one? Yours is stream riparian, right?
Yeah. So we focus on streams. So in terms of the terrestrial, I don't know, to be honest. So in terms of the freshwater vertebrates within the streams, there would be a difference based on the size of the stream, and whether it's like a canal, like a ditch, a drainage ditch, or whether it's a stream, or whether it's a large river. So like the drainage ditches within these plantations, they're quite stagnant, and they don't have like much of a flow, so they have different communities within them. Like I think it's more associated with ponds and wetlands, for example, rather than rivers. And then in the large rivers you have much higher flow, so you have generally different habitat, different communities.
Okay. Pak Nurfianto, if you have some more questions, you may raise your hand. You can ask directly using microphone or a video. The next question actually from Pak Willius. So I will read that question from Pak Willius. Could you please explain how freshwater biodiversity restoration in oil palm landscape influence the abundance and effectiveness of natural enemies in pest regulation? So the relation between water and the stream.
Okay. So this is partly kind of what we're doing with the research with this, the general rotor experiments. So within the experiment, we're also looking at yield within the plantation and whether this riparian restoration have either a positive or even a negative effect on yield. So there's one argument that in riparian restoration you can have more natural predators within this riparian area, and then these will spill over into the plantation and sort of reduce the number of herbivorous insects that are damaging the crop. But there's also an argument that you could have more herbivorous insects within the right area. These flow into the plantation, cause more damage to the crop. So this is something that's kind of also being monitored as part of the experiment. In terms of freshwater biodiversity, so the example that I used was the dragonfly and damselfly. So these are both predators. Both in the freshwater and the terrestrial environment. So these definitely have potential to act as predators on the natural areas in of crops and help regulate pests. It's not something I'm specifically looking into, but there's definitely potential there, potentially future research.
Is there any publication that mentioned that? Cite yours?
Yeah, there is some research which talks about the potential of pest regulation, not specifically on oil palm. And there was a lot of dragonflies in my samples, so there's it's definitely potential there. Probably something I maybe look into the literature more and talk about in the context of my findings when I sort of do my rest of my analysis and figure out it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public? Or from this law? Is there any some other questions? Silakan, bahasa Indonesia juga boleh. Oke, silakan. Ini dia. Ya, apa ini?
In this version, I want to ask a question regarding the LWD. From what we learned, you observe the natural LWD that's from on your home, right? And also you make the artificial using the palm for the stamina law. I want to ask the question like, is there any difference if we use in case maybe the old palm oil and maybe we using not the palm frond but the wood or something and maybe for a different composition or something? Is there any difference or maybe just the same effects on the
Okay, so like the entire tree compared to just fronds, so I get back on my graphs. Yeah, so again, just on this graph, so the middle one is the restored site. So this is that palm frond structure that we use for the experiment. And then on the right side, the natural LWD, this is the fallen palms. So this is like, some of them are entire trees, some of them is still just parts of the trees already decomposed. And so we see with the natural ones, so these fallen palms, where we have much higher abundance, higher than our experimental site. And we also see more diverse, slightly more diverse systems as well. So really, I think these mature palms, they're more complex habitats. So you have kind of like the bundle of roots at the base. And I think this provides like quite a little habitat for invertebrates to attach to. And then you have the kind of big trunk of the palm, which can kind of change the flow of the river as well, and act as a barrier to the flow. And this can kind of create shelter areas, which fish and invertebrates are part of these. So I think the bigger, more complex woody debris has a bigger positive effect. Flip side is that by having these big wood structures in the river, you can change the flow of the river to act as the barrier to flow. This could potentially lead to increased erosion plants and could start affecting the plantation. So that's kind of a caveat that we need to consider.
It's just numbers, right? Numbers of individuals, right?
Yeah, so this is the average of individuals at each of the samples.
The interest to verify the richness of species.
You have the data, right? The species numbers also, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not the species level, the identifications. It varies, but it's generally kind of family and entomorphic species after that. Because the guides that go to get off the so yeah, this is just a quick look at that I had. So again, we see this increase in diversity as well.
Any other question? Masih ada? Nanti satu lagi ada Patrick and Fanny. So,
Okay, thank you for your presentation. My name is Fanny, also PhD student in IPB. As is my question. And I just have one question for you. And do you have an interesting or memorable experience in your report?
Sorry.
Do you have any interesting and memorable experience in your report?
I feel okay. Snakes in the river. It's been recorded, yeah, and a few times. Scorpions in my house. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the field work. Just out in
Do you
the.
handle it?
Sorry.
Do you handle it? If you
Which is- with this.
No, I didn't have if you have to find it now.
Oh, snake.
Yeah, you don't try.
Did I handle it well? Is that the question? Yeah.
No.
Is it a surprise?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so there's a few times I was in the river sampling and pythons came down the river. I remember the first time the P-Clouds wave said it was a cobra and we all ran out.
Oh, yeah?
And then they were like, oh no, it's just I mean I was still saying
Oh, yeah.
it. But yeah, they come quite fast down the river, so
Okay,
Okay, thank you. Maybe it's the last question. As we know that Indonesia, especially Sumatra, faces heavy rain and so the flood disaster likely about 2 or 3 months ago. What is your opinion about this restoration? Can it mitigate disaster, something like that?
okay. So yeah, in general, these kind of monoculture plantations, there's been research kind of show that it can lead to an increase in flooding. This is often the case with agriculture, where it's replaced forest. So you have we call like a more flashier hydrology. So this means essentially when it rains, the water kind of so on the plantations the soil is often more compact because heavy machinery has been used to establish the plantation and water is less able to filtrate the soil. But also we don't have the effects of the native tree roots which kind of break up the soil and create pores for water. And so in a forest the soil acts like a sponge. It absorbs the water and it holds the water and slowly releases it into the river. But generally in agriculture, the water kind of just flows straight off the surface. Like a lot of these plantations, it's just bare ground, right? There's no vegetation or anything. So the water just flows straight off the surface into the river much more quickly, and this can lead to flood more frequent flooding. At scale, I guess there's potential for the riparian buffers to help reduce that by slowing the flow of the water into the river. But yeah, it's potentially, but I can definitely say that for certain. Depends on the broader catchment.
Did you know what what's condition after the heavy rain?
What?
So your what condition? What's the after the heavy rain,
After the recent flooding.
after the flood, did you see that?
Yeah. Apparently it didn't, because we're located in Real, the flooding wasn't too bad. But in general, like I kind of said before, I lost 12 of my 20 experiments. Yeah, so this was from during the wet season, the heavy rain, and it just washed out or it buried structures with all the sand that it moved across the bottom.
Thank you.
Really, thanks me asking a question regarding why dominant families like when A and Creonidae, Lepidolidae are both generalis and their dominant indicate forest degradation across the topic. So what the reason? Why some dominant families like when Creonidae and Lepidolidae become indication of forest degradation?
Yes, this is something I need to look into more. This is only really kind of early findings, so there's something I need to investigate more, like what makes them more generalist or makes them more specialist. But generally, the split between the dragonfly and the damselflies is that the dragonflies have better dispersal capability, so can move around some more open habitats better, and they can control their body temperature. So they're less dependent on shading. So this means they can cope better in general in open areas where forest has been lost and the land use has been changed. Whereas the damselflies, their body temperature, they're thermal conformers, so their body temperature is dependent on their environment, and they need to regulate the body temperature using an environment, which means they need shading, which is not really important to them. And so shading is obviously more typical in forest environments than in where the land's deforested. So that's part of the explanation of why dragonflies sometimes we see more generalists than damselflies, more specialists. But yeah, I need to look into more of the family level differences because this is quite important.
Okay. But generally, can we say that dragonflies is somewhat generalized?
Generally, yeah. So there's
This
been
can be different, more prevalence.
yeah, there's been multiple studies on this, but then there has been more recent studies to say that this is oversimplified. You need to look at the family level, but yeah, generally you can consider it.
Okay, masih ada yang dari online? Saya oh, still some of them 1, 2, 3. Okay, take why is the indication dominance of I think from the you just answered the question. I hope that Devi your answers. The next one, to what extent can the effectiveness of the WD restoration is indeed be generalized to muddy rivers and big swamp stream, a stem located within oil palm plantation? So from Ibu Laura.
Yeah, okay. So that's a really interesting question. So again, woody debris is used in a variety of different stream types. So it's often used in temperate regions and don't typically have like the sandbed streams like you have here. They're not so common. We often have like gravel bed streams and with coarser substrates, and woody debris is still effective in restoration there. It is only soft bottom streams, so for example sand, but also should also in rivers where the potential for the riverbed to change and diversify as the flow of the water changes around the large woody debris is higher. So it's soft bottom will change more, change the morphology and structure of the stream. So yeah, it's I don't know if there's been any research on it, but yeah, there's no reason why large reef restoration shouldn't be effective. There's no reason to think that it shouldn't be effective to keep swamp streams on water.
You mentioned that in Indonesia it's not common, but is it very common in other areas than in Indonesia, for example?
Also, woody debris restoration.
Yeah, restoration.
Not in the tropics.
Not in the tropics.
Yeah, just most more in like in Europe and in America, North America, because we have like a longer history of agriculture and our streams have been very modified a long time ago. They were straightened and wood was removed and they were very degraded. So it's quite common now that we're back in the stream. There's a technique and rivers as well. They've been straightened and now they're being re-wiggled again. So there's lots of river restoration going on, like in the UK, because streams have been modified so much. Yeah, in kind of the rapidly developing tropical regions, it's not really something that's been done yet. The focus has been on riparian buffers. So,
I think when you mentioned we have longer history of agriculture, I think the longer history of industrial agriculture. Because traditionally we have agriculture but more conventional.
Yeah.
And now we're changing into your kind of agriculture.
Yeah.
And now we learn that you learn that it should be back to things going back and forth.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's not long history of industrial agriculture and physically changing the rivers to better drain the landscape so for farming is. So kind of the same as now you have like peat swamp areas which are being drained and converted to stations. We also have like similar peatland in the UK. We used to have a lot of peat and this was also drained. That's a space for example.
Absen Pak ya. Habis baru bisa share screen habis itu. Dia harus stop share dulu.
So hopefully this is why our research is we can use things that we've learned in Europe from agriculture and river restoration, see if we can how we can apply this modifier to tropical.
Okay, then the last question from Pak Diki Trianto. Since the sampling was carried out in an oil palm plantation area, isn't it natural that the abundance of them survive is low because this species is very sensitive to microclimate and they are generally found in forest area. So,
So that is right. It's also why it's interesting that in the restored sites you saw an increase in the riparian restoration experiment compared to the baseline. We saw this increase at both rows 1 and rows 2 of damselfly abundance. So it starts off low and it's increased quite a lot. But yes, and it's correct. So it's naturally slow, which is why it's interesting that we now see the increase in the restored areas.
well, I suppose the question for Pak Diki is the last one, but there's another one. But Akmal is in here, so you might understand it.
Small person. I'll just take Akmal. I think. It's fun.
Sebenarnya pertanyaan itu.
Oh, really?
Actually, my friend has his
Oh, my text.
yes. Jake. Will the remaining damselflies communities in refugee habitats resulting from heat degradations, for example, plantation and former mining areas, recover to pre-disturbance conditions through ecological succession, or will they persist as alternative communities dominated by disturbance tolerant species?
Okay, yeah, great question. So I think this depends on the wider landscape and how connected these refugia are to wider habitat within the landscape. So one thing we see at Smartree, not just on my research, but with the other research going on at the Rota restoration sites, is the ability for different taxonomic communities to recover seems to be limited in terms of the diversity, seems to be limited by essentially what species are already there. So at the restoration sites, Smartree, the whole kind of whole area is dominated by oil palm plantation. There isn't any forest around. So there's nowhere for these rare forest species to come from when small areas of forest are restored on plantation. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So the ability of the community to return to its pre-disturbance level will depend on how connected it is to its environment and its disposal capabilities as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it identifies, but it would depend essentially on how connected these refuge habitats are to broader habitats, which the identifiers can recolonize. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, the last one, finally, yes, that's curious. Even we can see how we are already online.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of your collect class, dragonfly and damselfly, do you see or collect any taxa like water beetle like Pisidae or Hydrophilidae? I just curious because I'm working on beetle.
Okay, yeah. So for
Yeah, you
so yeah for so I focus on the dragonfly and damselfly for the riparian restoration. They have a long-term data set, and I just focus on dragonfly and damselfly. For my woody debris restoration, so I looked at all different groups. Yeah, so Habictura and Coleoptera are both missing. That's because I haven't ID'd them yet. So when I go back, I'm going to finish off and I'm going to ID them. I did decide not to look at like the water striders, the skaters. Decided not to include them in my woody debris restoration. And this was because they're on the surface of the water. And I wanted to really look at, because they kind of sit in groups at the surface of the water, I think it was more by chance when I was sampling, if I could one side maybe I get lots of them, and it's just by chance because they move a lot very quick. And I wouldn't get invertebrates who are actually colonizing the wood directly. So I just decided that I think that the water striders and the skaters are probably not interacting with the woods and the water too much. So that's the decision I made. But I do have beetle with barley and yeah. So I think that is not
Okay, I think the time is up. Thank you very much, Jake, for sharing your recent experience. This is a wonderful experience for us to learn something else besides pests and diseases, of course. Let us get back across to Jake. And I'll define to master of sharing.
Okay, thank you very much, my professor, for guidance and discussion. And now I will take over. And I think just short conclusion. Today's seminar solved the importance of freshwater conservation in oil palm landscape and how better monitoring and restoration can support the biodiversity. And next, we will now proceed to the certificate presentation. The certificate will be presented by Professor Damayanti Bori, representative of the Department of Land Protection at University. Yeah, this is for, yeah.
Kita tutup foto dulu. Baik, itu. Share foto.
Thank you. And this is small gift for yeah, entomological process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake, for coming. Terima kasih. Yeah. Okay, and finally, we would like to thank the Department of Land Protection at the University and also the Entomological Society of Indonesia, Bogor chapter, especially for the strong collaboration and then nice weekday. Nice weekend. Have a good day. And thank you very much. Thank you all participants in online. Thank you.
Everybody in the world, we'll have restaurant as well. What we like to just put together fight and our future will get you with campus schooling. Okay, yeah. So now you have a PTS that's going to give you the like yeah. Or by yeah. It was yes, maybe you can tell me. Just not the best picture. Maybe this one, it's like yes.
Pak, sami-sami Pak, mohon maaf kesalahan-kesalahannya.
Maksudnya itu aja paling nanti dibuka aja gitu.
Iya, tadi kelupaan.
Iya.
Mau ngindahin kagok. Siapa?
Kalau di tengah nggak bisa kan ya? Atau bisa?
Karena layar, jadi tadi gini saya mau coba settingan gimana caranya di sini kontrolnya nggak berubah-ubah. Cuman karena tadi nemu caranya mepet, jadi ya udah.
Nggak apa-apa.
Ya Pak, nggak apa-apa.
Ada proses.
Ya Pak, siap.
Terima kasih ya.
Ya Pak.
Oh, wow, very good.